One thing that many people newer to the cryptocurrency space do not realize is that the blockchain space has many different communities. Within the various communities, there are different protocols, different technologies, different philosophies, etc. Decentralized finance, or DeFi for short, is sort of like cryptocurrency run completely by computers with no human intervention whatsoever. My next guest, Sid Powell, can help us understand the key differences between DeFi and the larger crypto ecosystem. Sid, welcome to the Daily Drop.
Hey, Bobby. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, I'm excited today to talk about DeFi because I definitely want to learn more about it. So let's start with the definition right at the beginning. How would you define decentralized finance?
So decentralized finance is an emerging technology that's built on top of the distributed ledger technology and blockchain-based platforms. But effectively, the way to think of decentralized finance is it's like a set of applications where you can program the transfer of money. So you can replicate financial products that are happening on software and technology-based platforms. So lending, trading, staking, borrowing, but they're all built on top of this primitive, which is blockchain technology and cryptocurrency.
Okay, so how would you differentiate between DeFi and crypto?
That's a good question. How I would separate the two is think of cryptocurrency like language. So it's this base layer primitive, and with cryptocurrency you have Bitcoin, you have other concepts like stablecoin, but on top of separating that from decentralized finance is almost like a printer. So if cryptocurrency is the language on which it's built, decentralized finance is a set of applications built on top of that. So one can't exist without the other, but decentralized finance builds on top of cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency is this primitive which allows you to have money which can be spent online, but decentralized finance is a set of applications that allow you to use that money. So you can have lending, borrowing, trading activity, and that's what separates the two of them.
Now, right now, my research indicates, the total value locked for DeFi is about 5% of the crypto market cap, right? So I think, you tell me, but I think it's because you really have to be somewhat technically competent to use DeFi relative to crypto. You can't just buy it on an exchange. You're really can you explain how technically competent do you need to be to use DeFi?
It definitely varies. So I would say there is this perception from the outside that you need to be very technically competent in order to use DeFi. But I would say there are a number of applications that are actually very easy to use. But you need to have certain base primitives or understandings of how to use it. A really big one at the outset is something like knowledge of MetaMask or how to use a wallet, because this is effectively it's almost the equivalent in Web3 or crypto of login with Google. A MetaMask is like having an account where you store your money, and it lets you then use DeFi applications, whether this is the likes of Uniswap or Aave or Compound, or indeed Maple. But it's a set. What's required there is not a huge level of technical competency. It's just familiarity with some of these conventions. And so I think in the same way that people weren't previously that knowledgeable about, use of mobile applications, but they adopt new conventions and habits that enable them to do that. I think that's what you'll find with cryptocurrency and with DeFi is that people will get used to the idea of using things like MetaMask or other wallets in order to use the platforms. And it doesn't really require a great degree of technical knowledge, just a new set of habits.
Okay, so it's almost like when there's a new social media platform, you just have to figure out how it works. So walk us through. We have a minute,
Exactly.
just like a base kind of level here, right? So you get a MetaMask, You have your wallet, and then you can just, what do? You log in to a decentralized exchange?
The best way I can think of the best way I could characterize MetaMask is think of this like an email account that stores money that you own, and so you can log in with MetaMask in the same way that you would log in with Google to an application. And when you do that on a decentralized exchange, for example, what happens is you would connect MetaMask, and then you would be able to see different money that you have or different coins. And what you could then do is, for example, on Uniswap, you could trade from USDC, which is a digital version of the US dollar, into Ether, which is the primary coin of the Ethereum
You know what?
blockchain.
I appreciate you going. There's so many scenarios. We're going to get more into it. We got Sid Powell here on the Daily Drop. We're back. The Daily Drop. I got Sid Powell. He is teaching us many things. Okay, let's talk about DeFi, its application. So I recently was reading that JP Morgan, biggest bank in the United States, has been conducting large DeFi tests recently. They sounded very complex, but also very cool. Is DeFi the future of banking?
Yeah, I think DeFi is more broadly, it's the future of finance. And why I say that is I came from a banking background myself. And so when you see how the sausage is made, there are a ton of manual processes and a tremendous number of people who are involved in even something as basic as sending out a loan to a large business client. What I think of when I think of DeFi is that the trend is that most finance is going to move on chain because it's this amazing set of infrastructure, like being able to email money to people, on which we can then start to build different financial products like lending and borrowing, for example. And so I think what you'll see is when you have a fintech or a finance company who doesn't need to go and build all that infrastructure themselves, you just have this natural competitive dynamic where they go and start building on the open, on open infrastructure. Banks don't necessarily feel the need to build everything themselves. They didn't rebuild the MasterCard and Visa networks. They used what was out there. And so I think as DeFi evolves, you'll see more and more banking institutions and financial institutions start to use this as infrastructure because it's just lower cost for them to operate.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So are you saying that in your view, especially coming from a TradFi, traditional finance for our people at home, having that background, you've noticed that there are a lot of inefficiencies and DeFi basically cuts them out. It's like a more efficient financial model.
Yeah, 100%. If I look at what goes into sending out a loan from a bank to a large company, there is a whole team of people working on operations who have to program that in, and it can only go out during business hours. If I look at how that can be accomplished with DeFi, particularly what we've built with Maple, that's really a click of a button by a lending company to just hit, fund loan, and then the money is instantly transferred directly from the wallet of the lender out to the wallet of the borrower. It cuts out any number of operational processes. And what it fundamentally does is it shrinks the requirement for this huge back office at a bank because you're now starting to rely on programmable technology, which can, programmable technology where you can code up the terms of a loan into a piece of software in a way that can't be done in conventional banking.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Maybe it might be honestly a stupid question, but I'm going to ask you. Is DeFi limited to the financial system? Can you use that technology and that ethos in other industries?
Yeah, so I think it's the core kernel of it is taking place in the financial system, but it also includes, if you look at the financial system, it's huge and includes ancillary products and services like asset management, AML, KYC, digital identity, and these are all things that I think will occur and be built as services around DeFi. Like the idea of having a digital identity is tremendously powerful. And if you look at really large companies like Stripe, you look at their mission and it's to increase the GDP of the internet. If you look at what that is, the meat of that is connecting the transfer of money with consuming, services and goods on top of the internet. When you look at what DeFi's promise is, it is essentially that. It's turning that into an open piece of infrastructure that anyone can access and use. So I think the potential of DeFi to impact and touch things like online gaming, sports and esports, as well as I mentioned before, digital identity and asset management is definitely tremendous there.
Okay, so do you largely view cryptocurrency the way that the public perceives it is really just sort of like a speculative asset, but you see DeFi disrupting the financial system?
Yeah, 100%. So I think the earliest, seeing it as a speculative asset is a very natural trend early on, because if you look at the first innovation, it wouldn't have been that interesting if you just put US dollars on chain. So that was why Bitcoin was the very first cryptocurrency. But using that as a base layer, you then build applications like DeFi on top, which requires you to, DeFi requires you to be able to build financial products. And so I think the public's conception is that as more of these products are built, they're going to see it starting to replace financial products. As I said before, my own background was banking and lending, and so I look at this as a much easier way to run a lending company. I mean, at its heart, what Maple is trying to do is give innovative companies the ability to access capital through loans and allow a new swathe of lending companies to go out there and compete and offer a lower cost, which ultimately is passed through to.
Look, I'm
to
sure
borrowers.
you're doing it very well because you seem to know everything. We got Sid Powell here on the Daily Drop. We're back to Daily Drop. Yeah, you heard that. Drop with a P. Sid Powell. We're talking about FTX, right? For all like the last couple of weeks, as everybody is. But, DeFi has been coming up over and over again. It's been getting more praise in the light of the FTX collapse. Why is this?
So I think the FTX collapse throws into stark relief the contrast between centralized finance and decentralized finance, or DeFi. So the really big issue and the thing that's highlighted most about the FTX collapse was the lack of transparency. So you didn't know where funds were going, and the ability to control people's funds. So when you put funds into FTX, they then control it and they're able to do whatever they wanted with it. And they're able to do that in a way where you couldn't see what was happening with your funds. If you contrast that with DeFi, DeFi is all about transparency. And the second element is non-custodial, like effectively non-custodial. But basically what it means is when I put my funds into a DeFi protocol, I can withdraw them. So I can kind of see what's happening to them and I can control it by being able to withdraw my funds. And so what we've seen with DeFi is that it held up remarkably well despite the FTX collapse. And we're now seeing that before people cared about speed and user experience. Now what people care about is security and transparency. And that's really highlighted by what happens in DeFi. And so I think you're going to see a huge tailwind for DeFi adoption in the wake of this.
Well, that's definitely the dominant conversation. So, okay, let me ask you a question. Do you think then, would an FTX-style meltdown, would that have been prohibited if it was just all DeFi?
Certain aspects of it, yes. So in one of the core elements of the FTX meltdown was that you couldn't see what was happening with funds. So with DeFi, you can see what's happening with funds on chain. And so that aspect would have been prevented. What you can't prevent, though, or the aspects that remain are fraud and hacks. So those aspects can still happen in DeFi. And so DeFi is definitely not a risk-free proposition. But what it does is it removes some of that opacity. So you no longer have this idea of a black box where you can't see what's happening to money once it goes inside there. That's what DeFi prevents. But what it can't prevent, and what was plaguing the space before, was the potential for hacks and frauds.
So it's interesting you say that because I researched that too, right? That there's like a disproportionate number of hacks, particularly at the bridge level within the DeFi ecosystem, right? So
yes.
How do you guard against that?
So I think bridges were definitely a much more riskier part of DeFi. Like that was where you tended to see the largest hacks occurring.
Can we actually define bridges too for our audience? Because there's people who are sort of newer to the space. Yeah.
So a bridge is where you have two blockchains. The bridge is kind of the link between them. And so what happens is, Bobby, if you're on one chain and I'm operating on another, and you wanted to use the protocol I'm running on the other chain, you would have to bridge to it. So what it means is you lock assets in one chain and then release them on another chain. So it's that link. But where it becomes a security risk is you have to have a lot of assets locked within the bridge. And so what hackers do is when people lock them in, they then release them and steal them on the entry point to the other chain. And so
these are like big thefts. It's not like $5. It's like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions. Yeah. So Wormhole on Solana was about 300 plus million. The Ronin hack on Axie Infinity was about, I think it was 600 million. But the thing is, so that bridges remain one of the riskiest aspects. But where you avoid that is when you have applications that are solely localized to one chain. So if you're doing something solely on Ethereum and you're not bridging out of it, then you can avoid a hack. And so I think the one of the answers there is just from a security perspective, it is keeping a closed loop on how you build things. So it's not an ideal answer in that the risk remains. But I think what you're saying is
let me ask you a question. Not to be rude. Just we have a minute left. So because people are concerned, right? Like FTX happens, and they're like, oh, the centralized exchanges. Oh, DeFi is the answer. But then it's like, this is terrifying. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being stolen in DeFi as well. Like, what are people supposed to do?
Well, I'd contrast it with the billions of dollars that have so far been stolen in CeFi. But what I would say is that what people are to do is to be wary, be mindful. And DeFi is a tool. It is not an answer in and of itself. So like any tool, it still has risks. But what people should be looking out for is transparency coming from the teams that are building there, looking for things like security audits, looking for trusted partners.
Let's go to break. We're going to finish up with one more segment. We got Sid Powell here on the Daily Drop. Okay. Welcome back to the Daily Drop. Sid, I mean, it's amazing how many things you know, right? I just like invented questions in the moment. You know the answer to that too, you know. It's great. So look, there's a lot. Obviously, like we only have a 20-minute show. DeFi is like, it's just so expansive. But let's try to like summarize. So do you think that DeFi is the future of finance?
Absolutely. So where I stand, you know, coming from a financial background, DeFi is building new products every day. And my ultimate belief is that we're going to see a trend where all financial products eventually shift on chain. And that is going to be in the form of DeFi infrastructure. So whether it's investing, borrowing, lending, I see all of that heading onto DeFi infrastructure.
Okay. And in terms of risks, obviously we went through the bridge risk, the hacks. Are there any other DeFi risks that we should be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. So the main ones are hacks, which will come from effectively errors in the software code. You can have fraud if you're dealing with particularly anonymous actors or platform operators. So be mindful of that. And then the other one is, of course, market volatility. So it's a very volatile space. So hacks, fraud, and market volatility are things people should be aware of.
So one thing that I'd read too, in terms of actually a benefit, is that with DeFi, you have like automatic liquidations, right? So can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is the idea that if I'm lending to you, what I can require you to do is put down some collateral. So that could be Bitcoin, it could be ETH or something else. But effectively, if I lend you $100, I'm asking you for $150 of collateral. And what I'll do is, if the price of your collateral drops, I will sell it and use it to repay the loan to myself. And so that was a really popular form of lending in DeFi, and one in which performed very well during the volatility of this year, where you could see that those smart contracts would automatically liquidate it and in that example, repay the loan that I'd given to you. So it prevents me losing any money, and it prevents a lot of users in DeFi from losing any funds.
So just on the surface of what we know, what we've been able to unpack from the FTX controversy, it seems that that system, this automatic liquidation, I don't know, that would have prevented the whole FTX collapse from happening. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because the idea was that FTX should have had that system in place for Alameda, which was where a lot of credit was being extended. And that wouldn't have happened in DeFi. But what happened with FTX was they actually had like a no liquidation account for Alameda. So they weren't actually liquidating them as the value of that collateral dropped. So I think it highlights why DeFi is important infrastructure, because one, you would have seen the borrowing amount that Alameda had, and two, you would have had automated liquidations behind it. It is important to note, though, that I think under collateralized lending and other forms of lending, if we really want DeFi to eat finance and be the future of finance, those need to still occur on chain. So you can't have only one type of lending being over collateralized if you really want this space to reach its full potential.
Dude, I just want to buy you like 8 beers and then just talk to you about like DeFi for hours, because you explain everything really well. But okay, let's sum up a little bit in terms of the timeline. Okay, so what sort of timeline is DeFi on to becoming mainstream?
I think it's definitely years. So anything shorter than that is probably being too optimistic. What we have seen though, and this adoption was probably set back somewhat by events like FTX. But what we haven't seen is we haven't seen institutions pull out wholesale. We still see, as you said, Bobby, JP Morgan is doing settlements and test transactions on DeFi. So we're seeing more interest here. And I think particularly as DeFi held up so well, despite the FTX collapse, that just makes people more confident that it is robust infrastructure and is here to stay. But I always operate, let's say for me, it's probably about a 5-year time horizon, I think, before we're really achieving a lot of the breakthrough mainstream adoption.
So 5 years, and then everyone's gonna be using DeFi, including my mom.
I would love to see your mom using DeFi.
Don't talk about my mom, Sid. You come on my show. Look, Sid, I appreciate you coming on. Please come again. I had a great time. I learned a lot from you.
Thanks, Bobby. Appreciate it.
DeFi is about 5% of the crypto market cap right now. But as these scandals add up in the crypto space, more and more people are looking at decentralized finance as a way to potentially improve upon crypto's centralized villains. But as more and more people become attracted to the DeFi space, will we simply see more efforts to program malicious smart contracts? As they say, crime follows money. We'll see you next time on The Daily Drop.